today I would like to talk about bigger SolarWinds deployments. Like the enterprises, the global players, companies who use various deployments around the globe and who use many applications in the background who need to be consolidated, right? And I was like, yeah, I could probably talk about that just on my own for an hour, but that would be a bit boring. So I was like, yeah, I'm in Germany and I have an expert sitting here in Germany who is really experienced with SolarWinds, and he brought like 2 or 3 stories with him today. Now, here he is, Holger Mundt. Holger, who are you exactly?
Hey, Sascha. As you might already know me because we both go along like for 6 years now. But the audience might not know me. I'm the owner of iTresor here in Germany, a SolarWinds implementation partner. I'm doing SolarWinds for 9 years now. So next year will be my 10th SolarWinds anniversary. So the story was all the way back to where I even started as a SolarWinds consultant. So the SolarWinds guys came to us and said, hey, we got this big project here in Germany. There's a customer who wants to switch from, like, say, Kiwi cat tools. That was the original outcome. And they want to have a more bigger environment. So that's where they came to us and they said, hey, can you help us with that? And they need some scripting and they need some stuff. So yeah, like I said, they started out with Kiwi cat tools and they had approximately 15,000 devices that were backed up there in their Kiwi cat tools. And the need for it was like they needed some granular authentication and authorization and auditing methods. And Kiwi wasn't able to do that, though. So they had a look at the NCM then. And yeah, that was the solution, the more mature SolarWinds tool. They wanted to stick with SolarWinds, and that's where they came up with, hey, let's have a look at NCM.
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, I think at some point I was involved a little bit with that project. Mm-hmm. That was like a financial sector, but that's all we can say about this, right? They had a mix of different network devices, right? So not just one particular vendor in that base over there. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. They were like heterogeneous networks with, I think they had back in the days, they had some Brocades, they had some Cisco, some Junipers, and some other vendors that, well, didn't play a big role, but they still had them.
Do you remember in the early days how the network looked like? So it was heavily distributed, obviously, because of all of the branches, but one data center, or how did it look like?
They had multiple data centers, but the NCM instance and back in the days also the Kiwi instance was in one data center, and it was mirrored to a second one with failover. They had the virtualization failover for their systems there.
Okay. So it was a big Kiwi instance already, yeah?
It was a big Kiwi already, yeah.
Okay. All right. So then you arrived on the scene with NCM.
That is correct. Yes, we arrived on the scene with NCM, and the customer also set a new goal. So they had those 15,000 devices in the Kiwi, and they said, well, we're growing and we want to manage more. So we need now 30,000 devices. Within the next 3 years, the situation would be, that they would have that many devices in their system. So we had a look at the SolarWinds guidelines, and they said, well, you should put 10,000 devices per polling engine, and you should have 3 polling engines per instance. What a coincidence. That were exactly those 30,000 devices that we wanted to manage. So we had a single NCM instance that was then capable of handling all those nodes and devices.
So you basically maxed out the system.
We maxed out the system. We even had a couple of times where we went over the suggested 30,000 devices. We, in top times, I think we had like 45,000 devices on those 3 polling instances, 3 polling engines, and we were already thinking, well, so let's see what will happen. But it went okay. So the guidelines that SolarWinds gave us were pretty well sized, that you don't overdo it. You can overdo it a little bit, but still don't look too deep into overdoing that?
Well, between 30,000 and 45,000, there's a minor difference.
Yeah,
right?
there is a minor difference, but we were stretching the goals.
Okay. How did the deployment look like?
The deployment was a main polling engine and 2 additional polling engines, and we had a separate SQL database. Even though the guidelines said you should look for a hardware SQL instance, we went with a virtualized environment, but gave it a lot of resources and had a dedicated virtualization infrastructure for the SQL. So that was, I think that was one of the key functions where the system could do more than suggested.
And I remember that there was a little bit discussions about they checked the market, right, to see what else is out there.
What we had at first running, so it was the whole system was kind of automated. So we looked into CMDB and we checked the nodes from the CMDB and imported them into the SolarWinds instance. And from that point, so we had approximate daily changes of 400 to 500 devices per day that needed to be automated. The downside, where we could do it with native SolarWinds GUI stuff, was we were not allowed to scan the whole network. So we had a fixed database in the CMDB, and we had to get that into the SolarWinds database. So that was something where we developed a script for that in order to dock onto the CMDB, process all the information, because the CMDB, usually it should be fine, but there were minor glitches in the data quality. So the script did a lot of checking and so on, and then it imported to NCM.
So wait, you said there's like 400 changes a day.
Yes. So they were putting up systems, taking systems down, moving systems. So those 400 changes are like new nodes, deleted nodes, and changed nodes. So that was putting it all together. That was the daily work that the script had to do.
So then they tried to unify their hardware, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct. Yes, there was the key to have a general vendor change and consolidate everything into a single vendor. So with that, they also were looking into the vendor's tools for managing the configuration of those devices. So they thought that, well, if we change everything, we have a single vendor and we can use the vendor's tool. They probably give it to us with the hardware for free or for a very low amount of money. So that's where they were aiming at. But still, they had that other vendors as legacy hardware. So your switches, your routers, you don't change them like on a yearly basis. When they run, they run. You make updates, you check the configuration, but you don't change the hardware.
Okay. So you more or less convinced them to stay with NCM.
Yeah. So the other hardware vendor, they came in and said, well, we're able to do, or we're confident that we will be able to do what NCM does. And they had like 2 years of time in order to prove that, but they weren't able to do everything. So now some stuff is done with the vendor's tool. For example, there's stuff that NCM is just not able to do, but there's a lot of stuff that NCM can do, and there's more stuff that NCM can do than the hardware vendor's tools. So they use both tools for it. So we work nicely together.
Okay. Scalability. You changed quite a few things now, and you expect growth, right?
That's correct. We don't expect growth. We already see growth.
Okay.
So we already scaled out the system. So the customer was gaining traction, and with the new vendor coming in, new machines coming in, new nodes coming in, we found that, well, our single NCM instance isn't gonna cope with it anymore, because from the 45,000 that we stretched earlier, they were like aiming for 90,000. So, well, that's a lot more than that. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you're already counting, and you're perfectly right. We have 3 NCM instances now, because each one supposedly should handle 30,000, even though we know it does more. But we wanted to keep in the SolarWinds suggestions and guidelines in case we need some help, and no one can blame us for, hey, you're overdoing it. So
that's right. That is actually one question which I have in my mind now. At the peak, you had like 45,000 with one instance, which is way over what we would usually say is working fine. Was there an instance where you had to reach out to support? And if yes, what did they tell you?
Yes, there was an instance, and they said, hey, you're doing a lot with that system, but it doesn't look like that it's the number of nodes that's affecting it. So it was the support was still helpful, and they said, hey, that's okay, you're doing cool stuff, we want to see you how we can fix your issue, and they did.
And Holger, I remember you mentioned like companies on a merger spree. I just know a shopping spree. So what was the merger spree?
The merger spree was a longtime SolarWinds customer who acquired multiple other companies, and those companies also had their SolarWinds instances there. So they were in the same field, and they were using same tools. So we were consulting the customer and said, hey, let's make the most out of it. There were licenses on the one subsidiary. They had like SAM, NCM, NPM. The others had VNQM, UDT. So we had a whole mix of licenses. So we said, let's go ahead and let's consolidate those together. We were working with the SolarWinds sales there, and they made a compelling offer to the customer so they could merge everything together. And then we had still the 3 instances that we wanted, or the customer wanted to have into a single centralized platform and a single centralized monitoring solution. So we went on and we said, like, yeah, let's have one single instance to rule them all. And that's where we started to consolidate them. So at that time, I was a bit afraid. So, oh my God, how are we going to do that? And I'm not only contributing to THWAC, I also pull a lot of information out of THWAC. So that's where I was like, let's have a look on THWAC. Did anyone else do it? And I found this little gem right here. And there is one: migrate nodes, volumes, interfaces to the other database, or to another database. And there was a question, and here Steve answered and said, hey, have a look at GitHub. And I said, what's GitHub and what's the Orion SDK? So, well, here we go. There's the Orion SDK, and we can download it here. And here's some examples. So that's where I basically started my consolidation work, and I utilized the SDK, wrote a lot of scripts. So here's something that was a bit challenging for me, the WMI nodes. That's something that really took a while for me to understand, how to move WMI data from one instance to the centralized instance then. So what we came up with is the multiple instances also had multiple custom properties, multiple stuff. So we had to move everything together. So that was a challenge. So it took a while. It was like, I think, 4 or 5 days of scripting. And we were able to do it, and everything was in one instance then.
Okay. So obviously you can't migrate everything, but most stuff probably would work with the scripts, right? Nodes get a new ID anyway. That's pretty much random, so that should work out fine. And the user accounts of the platform, what did you do there? Because I would imagine that there's different entities and everyone like, this is mine, you're not touching it, right? So politics, right? Red band.
Correct. As you can see here on the account limitations, what we did. So we basically set a custom property for each instance that this node was coming from. And we were putting those nodes into groups and then set an account limitation that only those users can look into that group. So that was the beginning. Overall, they as they were merging closer together, we were able to release that account limitation so that everyone could see the whole big picture. So that was it. But it was a long way into the project. So it was running, I think, 2 years. And then they basically said, okay, we now are one team, and we can show everyone everything.
Okay. So everyone is happy?
Everyone's happy, yeah. So the benefits for everyone were they now have the full app stack picture, as you can see here. The mean time to innocence, for example, so that's a phrase that I really like that SolarWinds has put up. The mean time to innocence is, they were able to get the point where the actual problem was much quicker than they did before, because they had the whole SolarWinds Orion platform modules and the whole app stack. That was something that really helped them a lot.
Okay, topic number 3, enterprise collaboration. And I remember you were talking of a very messy place.
It really was messy. So each team had their own siloed approach. They were using their own tools. Nothing was integrated. And in the event of some failure, they were all saying, hey, we look at our stuff. It's looking good. We don't know what's there. So we're just going to move the ticket to somewhere else. And they said the same, our stuff seems to look fine. So we're going to toss it to the next one. And there was a pre-deployment phase where I went on site to the customer, and I basically had each team for half a day in a room together and said, hey, what are you monitoring currently with your tools? Can we do that in a non-siloed approach, a global approach? So they were like it was a show and tell workshop with them. And on the last day, we had all teams, one member of that team together in the room, and we agreed, hey, we think SolarWinds is a good approach to that. And so we said, we're going to need some guys at your place who know this stuff. And so they nominated two admins who were to be the SolarWinds champions in that company. And so the other teams, they then voiced their demands and their needs to those guys. And over time, so to say, they became like masters. So the Padawan become the master. And one of the guys is already posting on Thwag, and he's correcting templates in Thwag, and that's pretty cool. So the Padawan has become a master. And overall, the whole experience of the monitoring solution for the teams was again, mean time to innocence. I had that phrase in the last section. It was reduced. So the saying, it's not my problem, was then really quickly resolved. Well, yes, it is your problem, because see here in AppStack, yours is showing red. And so it was more efficient in spotting the actual issues. And also they have customers of their own, so they're supporting other customers. So they could now really easily meet their SLAs for their customers, because they were seeing the issue, fixing the issue, and you're done.
Okay. Well, that is 3 really cool stories which we heard today, right? Thanks, Holger, for bringing these nice stories, and up for the beer now.
Up for the beer. Thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.